I was holding the wooden spoon the way I'd held it for more than 50 years, lightly, like something living, when Emily walked in, snapped the drawer shut with her hip, and said the words that cut clean through the room before I even turned around. "Don't touch my kitchen. My kitchen." She said it so easily, as if the house had been hers long before she married my son, as if I, at 79, had wandered in by mistake, trespassing where I didn't belong. I stood still for a few seconds, long enough for the steam from the pot to fog my glasses. I wiped them with the edge of my sleeve, not because they needed it, but because I needed a moment not to look at her. Emily moved with sharp, quick gestures. 27 years old, long dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, a face always set a little too firmly, like she was bracing for a fight even when she wasn't in one. She reached past me, grabbed the towel from my hands, folded it in half, and hung it back on the rack. "Like this," she said, "so it doesn't look messy." Messy. I'd kept this kitchen clean through storms, through sickness, through years of my husband coming home covered in sawdust, through Denny's muddy sneakers and school projects and teenage hunger raids. But now it was messy. I didn't answer. Silence is an old friend of mine. It says more than people think. Emily sighed, loud, impatient, like she wanted the whole house to hear her annoyance. "You always leave things wherever," she added, opening cabinets and closing them again, checking that everything was aligned the way she liked. "I'm trying to keep this place organized. You know, so it doesn't feel old." Old. That one settled deeper than the first. I stepped back, giving her room, though I wasn't sure when the kitchen stopped being mine to stand in as I pleased. A week ago, she'd reorganized the spice rack. 3 days ago, she'd moved my cutting boards to a more logical spot. Yesterday, she told me that the way I stored my tea wasn't hygienic. None of these things hurt on their own. A woman can listen to criticisms all her life and grow a thick enough shell. But this felt like someone peeling my home away from me one drawer at a time. She opened the fridge next, examining it like a health inspector. "You bought whole milk again," she said, without looking at me. "Denny and I don't drink that. It takes up space." "My husband drank whole milk all his life," I said quietly. "I've always bought it." "Well," she said, "things change." I felt that one settle too, maybe deeper. A car door slammed outside. Denny was home from work. I listened to his footsteps on the porch, the little pause he always took before turning the key, his way of checking if he could hear the TV or the radio on inside. When he walked in, I waited for him to come to the kitchen like he used to when he was a boy, dropping his bag, peeking over my shoulder to see what was cooking. Instead, he called out, "Em, you in here?" Not Mom? Not even hello? Emily answered before I could open my mouth. "In the kitchen. I'm rearranging things again. You'll like this better." I watched my son walk past me, kiss her cheek, and only then glance in my direction with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, Mom." As if he were greeting a neighbor he didn't quite remember. Emily slipped her arm around his waist. "Your mom keeps moving stuff," she said lightly, almost playfully, but the edge was there. "I'm trying to keep everything consistent." She meant under control. Denny didn't correct her. He didn't say that it was my kitchen, my drawers, my walls, my house. He just nodded, the way a man nods when he doesn't want to argue. I watched them together, my son leaning against the counter where his father once sat, peeling apples for him, Emily touching the cabinets like she'd built them with her bare hands. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years, Not anger, displacement. As if I'd been nudged out of the frame of my own life. Emily turned to me again, wiping the countertop I had already cleaned. "If you need something from here," she said, "just ask me. I'll help you find it." Help me. Find things. In my own kitchen. I nodded, because I couldn't trust my voice. But inside, something shifted. Something small, but solid. A stone settling into place. She didn't notice. Most people don't notice when an older woman grows quieter than usual. They mistake quiet for weakness. They forget silence can also be the moment before a decision. And I had just made one. Even if I didn't yet know what it was. I didn't go back into the kitchen after they finished their little inventory of what belonged where. I stepped outside instead, onto the back porch, where the paint was peeling in the corners, the boards uneven from years of weather and footsteps. My husband, Robert, used to promise he'd fix it when things settled down. And then life, as it does, never quite settled the way we thought it would. The evening air smelled of pine needles and cut grass, the kind of smell that used to make my boys run outside barefoot. Now the only footprints in the yard were mine, small and careful, like I didn't want the grass to remember I'd been there. I sat in the old wicker chair that creaked under me, and for a moment, I let myself look at the house, not as it was now, crowded with someone else's rules and energy, but as it had once been. The siding used to be a deep green, almost forest-colored, before the sun softened it to this pale shade. The kitchen window still had the same latch my husband installed when Denny was little. I remember him showing the boy how it worked, letting him slide it up and down while I stood behind them, laughing, because it took Denny only 3 tries before he slammed his finger in it. He cried so loudly that the neighbor thought something terrible had happened. Robert picked him up and said, "That's how you learn. Houses teach lessons too." This house taught hundreds. How to peel potatoes without cutting your fingers. How to soothe a crying baby at 3 a.m. How to patch a leaky roof with tar and stubbornness. How to survive Christmases where money was thin and tempers were thinner. It taught me how to keep going. I closed my eyes, remembering the clatter of my husband's boots, the smell of his aftershave, the way he'd kiss me on the cheek while I cooked. He never once told me how to chop an onion or where to put the salt. He said, "A home is built by the hands that love it. Yours built this one." I suppose that's why Emily's words didn't just wound, they hollowed something out. When I went back inside, the lights were on. I could hear Emily talking, her voice quick and decisive. "And we can move that ugly table out of the dining room. It's too big anyway." Ugly table? The table Robert carved himself, sanding it for hours until the wood felt like silk. The table where we celebrated every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every scraped knee and graduation and heartbreak. Denny's voice floated in weakly. "Mom likes that table." Emily laughed lightly. "She's sentimental, but people our age don't want bulky old furniture. We need clean lines, modern things." Our age. As if she and my son had blossomed into some separate, superior species, as if I had already been left behind. I didn't go toward them. I turned down the hallway instead, my footsteps quiet on the hardwood floors. The pictures on the walls were the same ones that had hung there for decades. My boys in their Halloween costumes, me and Robert at the lake, our first Christmas in this house. Emily had suggested taking them down last month. "They make the place feel cluttered," she'd said. "We should frame new ones. Something more current." Current. Meaning pictures where I was absent. In my bedroom, everything still felt like mine. The quilt I'd stitched by hand. The lamp with the chipped shade Robert hated to replace because it gives off warm light, and that's hard to find. The cedar chest at the foot of the bed with letters tied in ribbon, love notes from a man who drove an old truck and brought home flowers from a roadside stand. I ran my hand over the chest, feeling the grain of the wood under my fingertips. This room, at least, she hadn't touched. Not yet. I sat on the edge of the bed, and the truth that had been creeping around the edges of my mind finally settled in the center of it. They were moving into this house the way ivy creeps up a wall, quietly, persistently, until the original structure is hidden beneath something newer, louder, more demanding. It wasn't intentional cruelty. No, Emily didn't hate me. She simply didn't see me. To her, I was an older woman whose home she could improve, whose habits she could correct, whose presence was negotiable. And Denny, my sweet, complicated son, didn't want conflict. He had never been good at choosing between the two people he loved. So he didn't choose at all. He drifted toward whichever voice was loudest. Tonight, that voice was Emily's. I leaned back against the pillows. The house felt heavier somehow, crowded by their energy, their plans, their vision of a life where I existed only as a quiet background figure. Someone to move around. Someone to correct gently. Someone to keep in her corner. The kitchen lights went off. Footsteps padded down the hall. A door clicked shut. Then silence. Real silence. It was in that silence that something painful and sharp bloomed inside me. Not rage, no, that's too bright and quick. This was something slow, deliberate, old. A realization, not an outburst. This house had a heartbeat once. Now it was losing its pulse. And I was the only one who remembered how it used to sound. I lay there in the dim room, the walls holding decades of my life, and I whispered a truth to the darkness. I'm not done here. And the darkness whispered it back. I found Denny in the garage the next afternoon, standing beside the workbench where Robert's old tools still hung in their faded outline. Hammer, level, handsaw. Each one exactly where my husband had left it. Denny wasn't using any of them. He stood there with his hands shoved in his pockets, staring at the pegboard like it held answers he didn't want to ask for. Your father used to keep that bench spotless, I said gently as I walked in. Denny startled, then smiled in that quick, apologetic way he had as a boy when he knew he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Hey, Mom, I was just looking around. Thinking, I said. He shrugged. Something like that. For a moment, the garage felt like it used to. Dust motes dancing in the sunlight, the faint smell of motor oil, the quiet hum of a place where men worked out their frustrations by fixing things. Only now the air had a heaviness to it, something unspoken hanging between us. I sat on the old stool in the corner. Denny, can I ask you something? He leaned against the workbench, his shoulders tightening. Sure. When Emily says things about the house, or about me, do you agree with her? His brow furrowed. She doesn't mean anything by it, Mom. You know how she is. Direct. Direct. That was one word for it. Yesterday, I said quietly, she told me to stay out of the kitchen. He winced, just slightly, but I saw it. Yeah, she mentioned something. She said you were getting in the middle of her system. Her system, I repeated. In a kitchen I've cooked in for longer than she's been alive. He let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, she's trying. She wants everything to run smoothly. She's particular about order. She's particular about control, I corrected softly. There's a difference. Denny didn't look at me. He stared at the pegboard again, at the empty outline where Robert's wrench used to hang, the one he'd lent someone years ago and never saw again. Emily just wants to help, he said finally. She thinks you could use some structure. I let that sit between us. Structure. At 79 years old, after raising 2 sons, burying a husband, paying off a house, running a life. Denny, I asked, do you think I'm losing my place here? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved to the old lawnmower, nudging the handle like he needed something to touch. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Mom, Emily thinks the house should be more modern, more updated. She says it's time for us to take over some responsibilities. Take over. A polite way of saying, push you aside. And you? I pressed. What do you think? He hesitated just a beat too long. I think it's easier to let her handle things, he said. There it was. The truth he hadn't meant to reveal. The truth lodged under my ribs like a splinter. You think it's easier, I repeated. Not better. Not right. Just easier. He looked ashamed, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. The one who'd come running to me after scraping his knees, expecting me to fix everything with a kiss and a bandage. Mom, please don't make this a fight, he said wearily. I have enough tension at work. I just want peace at home. Peace, I echoed. And who pays for that peace, Denny? Me? He swallowed. You're overthinking it. I almost laughed then, but the kind of laugh that tastes like salt. Come here, I said softly. He stepped closer, reluctantly. I reached up and touched his cheek the way I used to when he was small, brushing a thumb across the place where a dimple used to be when he grinned. You're a good man, Denny, but you've forgotten something important. What's that? That peace you want? It isn't peace if someone has to disappear for you to have it. His face tightened. No one wants you to disappear. Not intentionally, I agreed, but it's happening all the same. He opened his mouth, stopped, and instead shook his head with frustration. Mom, Emily thinks— I'm not asking what Emily thinks, I said gently but firmly. I'm asking what you think. This is your home too, your childhood home, and you stand in it like a guest afraid to take off his shoes. His eyes darted away again. I could feel the conversation slipping, drifting toward that place where sons go when they don't want to face their own reflection. I didn't push further. I simply said, I don't want to feel like I'm in your way, or that my home is something to be corrected. He closed his eyes briefly, and for a moment I almost saw regret. But when he looked at me again, he forced a small smile. I'll talk to her, he promised. He wouldn't. We both knew it. And I realized then that Denny wasn't going to be the one to protect my place in this house. Not because he didn't love me, but because he didn't know how to stand between 2 women and choose the one who'd raised him. I stood, brushing off my hands, even though I'd touched nothing. I'm going inside, I said quietly. Take your time. As I walked back toward the door, the late afternoon light cast my shadow long on the floor of the garage, thin, stretched, almost unrecognizable. I paused, watching it tremble as I stepped over it. A strange thought came to me then. If I didn't defend my space soon, there might not be any shadow left to cast. Emily didn't wait long before finding another reason to tighten her grip on the house. It happened 2 days after my conversation with Denny, on a morning so quiet It almost felt like the calm before a storm. I'd woken early, as I always do, before the sun even decided whether it wanted to rise that day. The house was still, the way it only is when the young are asleep and the old are awake, remembering. I padded down the hallway in my slippers, careful not to let the boards creak. Habit. A mother learns silence when her children are small, and apparently I had learned it so well I never unlearned it. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, a sliver of yellow light cutting across the dark hall. That surprised me. Emily never woke early. When I walked in, she was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, my tea, the brand I'd bought for 30 years, but she'd emptied it into one of her new glossy jars with minimalist labels. She'd pushed my tin to the back of the pantry, behind a stack of her branded vitamin packets. She turned, and her face fell into that strained politeness she wore around me. "Good morning," she said, but the words hovered in the air like visitors who didn't plan to stay. I nodded, moved past her gently, and reached for the small basket where I kept onions and potatoes. Except it wasn't there. The counter was bare, clean, polished, sterile. "Looking for something?" she asked, taking a delicate sip from her mug. "My basket," I said. "Oh, I put your vegetables under the sink." She pointed without looking. They were making the counter look cluttered. Under the sink, next to the cleaning supplies. I said nothing. I simply opened the cabinet and found the basket shoved between a box of disinfecting wipes and a spray bottle. Emily watched me, waiting for me to react. When I didn't, she continued. "I've been thinking," she began carefully. "It might be best if you let me handle the cooking from now on." I turned to her slowly. "And why is that?" She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because you get tired and distracted. It would take pressure off you." Pressure. Cooking in my own kitchen was now pressure. "And," she added lightly, "you cut things in a kind of uneven way." Denny likes things tidy. I had cut things unevenly for Denny for 37 years, including the carrots I chopped for the soup he always begged for when he was sick. He'd never complained once. Before I answered, she set her mug down and leaned against the counter, adopting a tone I suspect she thought was gentle. "I'm just trying to create a more functional living environment for all of us." I nodded. "Of course." She relaxed a little too quickly. She thought she'd smoothed something over. Later that afternoon, she found me in the laundry room. A small space, narrow, with shelves Robert installed when the boys were still young. I was folding a set of towels, the white kind that soften after years of use. Emily stood in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking the light. "You don't need to do the laundry anymore," she said. "I have a schedule in place." "A schedule?" "Yes. Towels on Mondays, bedding on Fridays. Clothes on alternating days depending on who's using the machine. I've written everything down." She handed me a laminated sheet. Laminated as if she expected it to be used for decades, detailing every load, color-coded. My name wasn't on it. "I can do my own laundry," I replied quietly. "But that defeats the whole system," she said, genuinely baffled. "Consistency is important. Otherwise, it's just chaos." Chaos. Towels folded into squares instead of rectangles. Vegetables kept on the counter instead of under the sink. A woman living the life she has lived for almost 80 years. Chaos. By evening, she had one last request. "Please don't rearrange the living room furniture." I put everything where it works best now. I had moved one chair, not much, just a little. to sit by the window where the late sun still warmed the carpet. She moved it back without a word. I watched her straighten it to the exact angle she liked, an angle that faced the TV instead of the window, as if living rooms were meant only for watching something instead of looking at something. I didn't argue. I simply stood there, hands folded, the way women my age often do when we've learned that people rarely listen when we speak. But inside, something else was happening, something subtle, like the first crack that appears in ice just before it breaks. I understood then. Emily wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to reshape the house into something that didn't have room for the woman who had built it. And Denny, my quiet, tentative son, floated between us like a leaf caught in someone else's current. He wanted peace so badly that he didn't see the cost. It isn't the big moments that push an old woman out of her own life. It's the small ones. The cabinet doors moved. The lamps replaced. The baskets relocated. The routines overwritten. The slow erasing. That night, as I went to my room, I touched the wall with my fingertips, a habit of mine from years of walking the hallway half asleep, anchoring myself. I whispered, almost without thinking, "Not yet." And I felt in the quiet of the house that something in the walls whispered back, "Not yet." The day everything shifted began like any other, quiet, cool, with the soft hum of the morning settling into the house. I made myself a cup of tea in my room instead of the kitchen. It wasn't worth the sting in my chest anymore, watching Emily rearrange my things as if my hands were clumsy and inconvenient. I sipped slowly, watching the steam coil into the air like a ribbon, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something strange. The quiet didn't comfort me. It pressed in. Around 9 o'clock, the phone rang, a familiar number, my lawyer's office. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. The last time I'd spoken to Mr. Keller was 2 years ago, after Robert died. Back then, I'd signed a few papers with a kind of numb obedience, too drained by grief to understand half of what I initialed. Denny had sat beside me, patting my hand and telling me everything was straightforward and standard. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? But I never liked the sound of that word, trust. Not the emotion, the legal version. The trust was something Denny insisted on. For security, he'd said, for the future. At the time, I had no reason to ask, whose security? Whose future? The phone rang again. I answered. "Mrs. Holloway?" Keller's warm, cautious voice. "I hope you're doing well. I'm reviewing the annual report for your family trust and wanted to clarify a small update." "Update?" I asked. "Yes. Your son requested authorization to, well, let me find the exact wording. Yes, here. Adjust management rights for household property and maintenance decisions." Household property. Maintenance decisions. "Keller," I said slowly, "does that mean the house?" "Yes," he said, and I heard the hesitation. "Technically, the trust includes your home, yes? But don't worry. Any changes still require your approval." "And if I don't approve?" I asked. "Well," he said delicately, "the trustee can still petition for structural decision rights if the trust is deemed mismanaged." Mismanaged. By me. In my own house. "And who is the trustee?" I asked. There was a pause. A long one. "Your son, ma'am." I closed my eyes. The air felt thin. Keller continued gently. "He may not have understood the implications of his request. I'm sure it's all innocent." Innocent. I almost laughed. I thought of Emily's laminated schedule, her reorganized cabinets, her new rules. Her vision of modernizing something that was never hers, And Denny, my son, signing papers he didn't read, drifting along trying to avoid tension. I thanked Keller and hung up. I sat very still. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Not anger, not fear, just clarity. I remembered the promise I made to Robert when he was slipping away, one of those fragile bedside vows whispered between breaths. He'd taken my hand and said, "Don't let them decide your life for you, Marion. Not the boys. Not anyone." Back then I thought he was talking about grief, about becoming too dependent on my sons. I never imagined he meant my home. Our home. The only place in the world where every wall holds our fingerprints. I stood, slowly, as if rising through a lifetime of memories. By noon, I was sitting in Keller's office. He looked surprised, but pleased to see me. "Mrs. Holloway, I didn't expect you so soon." "I need to review the trust," I said. "All of it." He cleared his throat. "Of course. Would you like privacy?" "No," I said. "I want clarity." He pulled out the documents, thick folders I barely remembered signing. My name was there. Denny's name, too. More than once. Keller walked me line by line through the structure. The house wasn't owned by Denny or Emily, but the trust gave Denny influence over long-term decisions. If something happened to me, or if someone argued I could no longer manage things, the house would default to his authority. "Is there a way," I asked, "to remove the house from the trust entirely?" Keller looked at me long and hard. He was a man who'd known me through decades, weddings, funerals, births, deaths. He could read what I wasn't saying. "Yes," he finally replied. "It requires paperwork, a formal request, and your signature. But you are the grantor. You have the right to reclaim full ownership." Reclaim. A word with a pulse. "And how soon?" I asked. "If we process it today, the transfer can be effective immediately," he said. I felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot pulled free. He slid the forms across the table. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of it. Every letter I wrote was a step back into my own life. Outside it started to rain, the soft kind of rainfall that barely touches the ground before evaporating. It felt like the world itself was sighing. When it was done, Keller shook my hand. "If I may say so, Mrs. Holloway, this was the right choice. Right, necessary, overdue. The house would be mine, fully, legally, unquestionably. And Emily, who loved rules, documents, authority, would be meeting something she understood very well. A boundary written in ink." As I left the office, umbrella in hand, the first real sense of peace in months settled into me. Not joy, not relief, strength. The rain tapped lightly on the pavement, almost in rhythm with the steps of an old woman walking toward a future she wasn't afraid of anymore. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll tell them. But even as I thought it, I knew I wouldn't tell them tomorrow. I would tell them when the moment required it, and that moment was coming sooner than they knew. I didn't go home right away. I walked. At 79, walking looks different than it used to. Slower, deliberate, more like each step is a small agreement between the body and the will. But that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not younger, no, nothing had the power to roll back time. But steadier inside, the way you feel when you finally stop apologizing for standing in your own space. Rain whispered against the sidewalk, soft enough that I didn't bother opening the umbrella. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Paint peeling on old porches, lilac bushes heavy with blossoms, a few houses remodeled within an inch of their personality by people who wanted everything new. I wondered what Emily would have done if she'd been given full permission to update my home. Probably strip away every creak, every odd corner, every memory that made it real. By the time I reached my street, the rain had stopped. The sky was still gray, clouded, and the air held that strange feeling of waiting, like the world sensed a shift coming and didn't want to interrupt. I stood in front of my house for a long moment. It looked so ordinary from the outside. White siding, shutters Robert painted cobalt blue, the porch sagging on the right where he always said he'd fix it next weekend. A stranger might see an old house in need of work, but I saw a life. My life. I walked up the steps, hearing the wood moan under my weight, and as soon as I opened the front door, I heard voices. Emily's sharp, quick words and Denny's low, tired responses. I'm just saying, if your mom can't keep track of basic things, maybe she needs more help than we realized, Emily said. I paused in the doorway. She's fine, Denny replied, though not with conviction. She just doesn't like change. Who does? Emily snapped. But this house is stuck in a different century. You feel it too. Don't pretend you don't. I stepped inside and shut the door quietly. Their voices stopped. A moment later, Emily appeared in the hallway, arms crossed, ponytail pulled so tight it made her eyebrows arch. Oh, she said. We didn't hear you. I removed my coat slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to breathe. I went for a walk. In the rain? She asked, as if rain were some exotic hazard. You could slip. I hung my coat neatly on the hook without answering. Behind her, Denny hovered, hands in his pockets, guilt leaking from him like heat. Mom, he said, Emily and I were talking. About me, I replied. That shut him up. Emily lifted her chin. We're concerned about your safety. You've been misplacing things lately, forgetting small steps in the kitchen, and the other day you almost tripped on the rug. I straightened the rug, I corrected. That's all. That's not the point, she insisted. This is a big house for someone your age. Your age. Those words always land like tiny stones thrown from behind a hedge, never enough to bruise, but always enough to sting. And what is your point, Emily? I asked. She exchanged a quick look with Denny, that secret marital language people speak without words. We think it might be time, she began carefully, to consider some support. Maybe a caregiver. Or, she hesitated, a smaller living arrangement. There it was. The future they had planned for me. A room somewhere else, a corner of someone else's house. A life shrunk down to what was convenient. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't frown or stiffen or sigh. I simply looked at them. Two adults who believed age erased ownership, who assumed their preferences outweighed my history. Instead of answering, I walked past them and headed to my bedroom. Emily muttered something under her breath about walking away from the conversation, but I didn't turn back. In my room, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The papers from Keller were in my purse, folded neatly. I took them out and smoothed them across my lap. My name, and below it, full ownership transferred. There was a copy for me and a second for home records, mine to keep, mine to show if needed. Mine to reveal when the moment arrived. And it would. The house felt different now, almost humming. As if the walls themselves knew their allegiance had snapped back to me. I placed the papers into the drawer of my bedside table and locked it. I had no reason to hide them, but something inside me said to hold them close for a little longer. A quiet woman learns to trust her timing. Silence can be protection, too. Later that evening, I made myself a small supper, just toast and soup, while Emily clattered around the kitchen, rearranging drawers again. She didn't look at me, but every movement she made carried the confidence of someone who thought she had already won. Denny sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, the weight of avoidance heavy on his shoulders. When I walked out with my bowl, neither of them spoke. And that was fine. I wasn't ready to speak either. Change doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, a quiet click of a lock turning in the drawer where you keep your documents, a soft acknowledgement inside your chest. This is your home, and soon they will understand that. I went to bed early, and I slept without waking for the first time in months, because the house wasn't slipping away anymore. I was holding it, and I wasn't letting go. The morning I signed the final documents began so quietly, you could almost hear the dust settling on the windowsills. The air felt still, waiting. I'd slept deeply, so deeply that when I opened my eyes, it took a moment to remember where I was, who I was, and what lay ahead. Then it came back to me all at once. Today, the house would become mine again. Not in spirit, not in memory, but in ink. Emily was already awake when I reached the kitchen. She stood by the stove, arranging her breakfast carefully. A single egg white omelet, cooked in a pan she insisted on buying because mine were too scratched to be safe. She glanced at me as I entered, then returned to her cutting board with exaggerated interest. "Morning," she said. Her greetings always carried a thin glaze of civility, like frosting too thin to cover the cake beneath. I nodded and reached for the kettle. But the kettle wasn't on its usual spot. It was in the cabinet above the fridge, a place no reasonable person would store anything used daily. "Why is this here?" I asked. She looked over her shoulder. I reorganized. "I'm trying to make the counters look cleaner. Denny likes a tidy aesthetic." Tidy aesthetic. The way she wrapped her preferences in his name, it was almost artful. I didn't respond. I simply took the kettle down myself, filled it with water, and set it to boil. She watched me with those quick, flicking eyes, the way some people look at a toddler using grown-up tools, half concerned, half annoyed. "You're heading out today?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Yes." "Oh." She waited. "Do you need anything?" "No." She nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth tightening. Emily was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She knew something was shifting in me, though she couldn't yet tell whether it was resistance or resignation. I drank my tea in my room, the only place left in the house untouched by her hands. I looked around, at the soft, sagging quilt, the worn rug, the cedar chest that held more of my life than any account or ledger. This room wasn't pretty, not by Emily's standards, but it was real. It held laughter and grief in the grain of its wood. By the time the taxi arrived, I felt steady, not excited, not frightened. Steady, like an old oak whose roots run deeper than storms. Mr. Keller greeted me at the office with a warm, understanding smile. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, guiding me into a quiet room. "Everything is prepared." The documents sat neatly on the table. White paper, crisp edges, nothing dramatic at all. Strange how something so plain could hold so much power. He handed me a pen, heavy, silver, the kind lawyers like to use to remind people their decisions matter. "Last step," he said softly. I read each page slowly. My name appeared again and again. Grantor, owner, trustee terminated. Then Denny's name, crossed out in the relevant sections, no longer tied to decisions about the house. Emily's name never appeared anywhere. Not then, not now, not ever. When I signed the last page, Keller pressed his stamp firmly onto the bottom corner. A small sound, just a click, a seal, and then it was done. "Congratulations," he said. "You've regained full ownership." I nodded. It wasn't joy I felt. Joy is too loud. This was quieter, deeper, like standing in a room where the walls have finally stopped closing in. I left with an envelope containing certified copies. The rain had stopped while I was inside, and the sun peeked out, shy but present. The air smelled fresh, clean, possible. When I arrived home, the house felt different, as if it too had exhaled. I paused at the door, one hand resting on the frame, remembering Robert. Remembering his steady voice, the way it would sometimes rumble with pride even when he tried to hide it. He would have said, "Good girl." Inside, I heard Emily talking. Fast, impatient, moving from one room to another, like a person rearranging a space that wasn't settling for her anymore. "I told you, Denny, your mom's system doesn't work," she said sharply. "If she's going to stay here, we need to get more organized. She needs structure." Stay here. As if my presence were a matter of their permission. I walked down the hallway, my steps quiet on the hardwood floors that had carried my boys from toddling to running to leaving. My heart beat steady, and then Emily's voice rose, louder, irritated. "We should think about legally." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me standing in the doorway. "Mary," she said quickly, smoothing her shirt, "we didn't hear you come in." I nodded. "I know." Her eyes dropped to the envelope in my hand. She didn't know what it was yet, but something in her posture told me she sensed the shift, the way animals sense weather before humans feel it. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. "Everything is exactly the way it should be." I meant it. For the first time in months, I meant it fully. She didn't understand that. But she would. Soon. That night, while they slept in the guest room, my guest room, though she called it our space, I placed the documents in the drawer of my bedside table, locked it, and placed the small brass key under my pillow. I fell asleep easily, deeply. Tomorrow would come. And when it did, the house would speak through me. Not with shouting, not with anger. With simple, undeniable truth. And truth, once spoken, changes everything. Emily's breaking point came over something so small, so trivial, that if I were a younger woman I might have laughed. But age teaches you that it's never about the thing itself. It's about the tension underneath, the unspoken rule someone is trying to force on you. It began with a dish towel. The morning light was thin when I walked into the kitchen. I'd woken before dawn, as usual. Old bodies rise early, sometimes because they want to, sometimes because they have no choice. I was making myself oatmeal, nothing complicated, nothing that would disturb anyone. I opened the drawer to take out a spoon, except the spoons weren't there. I blinked at the emptiness, then opened the drawer below it. Forks, where the spoons should have been. The drawer beneath that, ladles. Some new order. Not mine. I found the spoons eventually, in a narrow drawer beside the oven, stiff and crowded, like they'd been exiled. I took one, turned, and nearly bumped into Emily. She wore leggings and a fitted top, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. the look of a woman preparing for battle without knowing she's already lost. "Why are you in here?" she asked, though her voice was sugar-coated. "I'm making breakfast." She studied me, my posture, my bowl, the spoon in my hand, like she was inspecting a child left unsupervised. "You used the wrong towel," she said suddenly. I followed her gaze. A dish towel hung by the sink. White cotton with blue stripes. The one Robert always used when he washed his hands after gardening. "What's wrong with it?" I asked. "It's decorative," she said. "I told you yesterday." She hadn't. But even if she had, I didn't answer. I simply reached over, took it, and wiped a bit of water from the edge of the sink. That was all it took. Emily's face tightened, her jaw clenched, and when she spoke again, her voice had the kind of heat that comes from coals, not flames. "Do you ever listen? I have worked so hard to create order in this house, and every time you ignore what I say, you make things harder." I set the spoon down. "Emily, it's a towel." "No," she snapped, stepping closer. "It's about respect. This is our home too, and you constantly undermine everything I'm trying to do." Our home. That word again, spoken by someone who had never built a single part of it. She kept going, her voice rising. "You leave things in the wrong place. You move furniture. You rearrange the pantry. And now the laundry. God, the laundry. Why did you wash the linens yesterday? Yesterday wasn't a linens day." "Because they were dirty," I said quietly. "That is not the point." Her voice echoed off the cabinets. Denny must have heard the tension, because he hurried in, hair tousled, shirt half-buttoned, his face weary before the day had even begun. "What's going on?" he asked. Emily turned on him with a breathless laugh, as if I had driven her to the very edge of reason. "What's going on? Your mother keeps messing with the systems I put in place. It's like she doesn't care about the harmony here." Harmony. The word felt like a splinter under my skin. Denny rubbed his forehead. "Mom, maybe you could try to be a little more flexible." Flexible. Like a branch bending for the wind of someone else's comfort. "I've lived in this house for 40 years, I said softly. "Yes," Emily cut in, "and it shows." I felt that one. Even at my age, a woman can still bleed inside. She stepped closer, invading my space. "I'm not trying to be cruel, but you need to understand. You're not the only one living here. You're not the only one making decisions. And if you can't respect the routines we're trying to establish—" "Emily," Denny murmured, but she held up a hand. "No, I'm done tiptoeing. I need to be honest, Daniel." She looked me straight in the eye. "You can't keep doing whatever you want in this kitchen. It's not just yours anymore." The room fell silent. I looked at her, not in anger, but in a sort of slow, stunned clarity. She truly believed that. She believed it so deeply she didn't even hear herself. Denny exhaled and turned away, unable to watch, and Emily, emboldened by his silence, delivered the final blow without realizing it would be her undoing. "You need boundaries, and you need to follow them." I felt something inside me settle, not crumble, settle, like a stone placed firmly where it belonged. I wiped my hands on the decorative towel, folded it once, hung it neatly back on its hook. Then I said, very softly, "Emily, we should talk later, in the living room." She scoffed. "If you have something to say it now." "No," I replied. "You'll want to sit for this." Her brows knit in confusion. "Why? What now?" I met her eyes calmly, more calmly than she expected, more calmly than anyone my age is ever expected to be when spoken to like a child. Because you've mistaken hospitality for ownership, Emily, and that ends today. She laughed, short, incredulous, dismissive. Is that supposed to be a threat? No, I said, picking up my bowl of oatmeal. It's a correction. And I walked out, leaving her staring after me, too proud, too sure of her standing to realize that the ground beneath her feet had already shifted. By tonight, she would know. I spent most of the day in my room, not hiding. No, that's never been my nature. But preparing. Not with speeches or strategies, just with stillness. Age teaches you that silence is its own form of sharpening. It clears the noise so the truth can rise to the surface like cream. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the steam curling softly in the cool afternoon air. Outside, the maple trees stood bare and honest, their branches thin but unbroken. I watched a single leaf cling to a twig, trembling every time the wind pressed against it. I felt a small kinship with it. Not in fragility, no, but in the simple fact that it refused to fall before it was ready. Around 5, I heard the front door open. A gust of cold entered the house, followed by Denny's tired footsteps. Emily's sharper ones echoed seconds later, punctuated, impatient, shifting weight, like someone unused to standing still. Their voices drifted down the hall. I'm not apologizing, Emily was saying. She treats me like I'm some intruder. Denny sighed. Maybe ease up a little? I have eased up, she snapped. You don't see half the things I let slide. I smiled into my tea. Yes, I thought. That is the problem. She expected praise for not steamrolling me entirely. Their conversation moved into the kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd told me not to touch her things. I heard the fridge open, the clink of glasses, a cabinet shutting harder than necessary. Denny's voice was a low murmur, tired, anxious. Then a short silence, followed by Emily's voice sharpening, brittle as cracked glass. What does she even want to talk about? What now? Exactly. It was time. I stood slowly, my bones stiff but obedient. I smoothed my sweater, braided my hair back, and walked down the hallway. I didn't rush. Women my age don't need to rush. We arrive exactly when we mean to. They looked up when I entered. Denny straightened immediately, that guilty half-rise men do when they know something is coming. Emily folded her arms, already defensive. You wanted to talk, she said, chin lifted. I did, I answered. In the living room. Emily rolled her eyes. Is this really necessary? Can't we just... In the living room, I repeated, my voice steady as a beam across a doorframe. Something about my tone, quiet, unwavering, made her blink. She exchanged a glance with Denny, then followed me. The living room still smelled faintly of cedar from the old chest Robert made. The afternoon light had faded, leaving the room washed in that soft gray-blue shade that makes everything look honest. I sat in my chair, my place. They sat on the couch, close but not touching. I folded my hands in my lap. Emily, I began, today was not about a towel. She opened her mouth to protest, but Denny nudged her knee. To my surprise, she closed it. You've been trying to reorganize this house, I continued, piece by piece, in a way that suits you. You've moved my belongings, changed my systems, replaced my things, and I let you. For a while. Emily's chin twitched upward. I was helping. No, I said softly. You were taking over. Denny rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. Mom, I held up a hand. Please, let me speak. He stopped. I've lived in this house for 40 years. I've buried a husband from this house. I've raised 2 boys here. I've cooked meals and hosted holidays and weathered storms in these rooms. This house is not just wood and nails to me. It is memory. It is my life." Emily crossed her arms tighter. "I never said it wasn't." "You didn't have to," I replied. "Your actions said it for you." She flushed, but said nothing. I reached into the side pocket of my sweater and felt the envelope, the edges crisp, the papers inside solid as truth. "I need you both to hear something," I said quietly. "What you believe about this house, about who controls it, is no longer accurate." Emily frowned. "What are you talking about?" I placed the envelope on the coffee table. "Today," I said, "I removed the house from the family trust. It now belongs to me. Fully. Legally. Irrevocably." The room held still. Denny stared at the envelope like it might burn him. Emily's face drained of color, then flushed hot again in a way that traveled up her neck. "That's impossible," she said, voice shaking. "You can't just—" "I can," I replied. "And I did." "You should have discussed this with us," she snapped, leaning forward. "We should have been part of that decision." "I wasn't," I said, "for a long time now." She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Denny swallowed. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant, sweetheart," I said gently. "But meaning something and allowing something are very different." He closed his mouth, realizing there was nothing to say. Emily found her voice again, sharp with fear, wearing the mask of indignation. "So what? What does this mean? That we have no say?" "It means," I said calmly, "that this is my house, and any rules made here are mine." Her breath hitched. "And what are your rules?" Ah, the question she didn't want to ask but had no choice. I leaned back, letting the quiet stretch, letting the moment breathe. "My first rule," I said, "is simple. Respect the home you live in, and respect the person who built it." Emily opened her mouth and closed it again. "My second rule," I continued, "is that the kitchen is not yours to control, nor is the laundry, nor the furniture. You may live here. You may contribute. But you will not take over what isn't yours." Her cheeks reddened, her hands tightening into fists. "And my third rule," I said softly but clearly, "is that if you cannot live here respectfully, you are free to leave." There. The line drawn in the quiet of an old living room. Denny's head dropped into his hands. Emily stared at me, pupils wide, breathing too quickly, like someone realizing the battlefield had shifted, and she was no longer on the winning side. Everything in her face screamed disbelief, but underneath it, I saw something else. Fear. Because she finally understood. The house she treated like her project, her possession, her future, was never hers at all. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. Silence carried the rest of the weight. Emily didn't speak at first. She just stared at the envelope on the table as if it were a live wire humming between us. Her fingers twitched once, a small, involuntary movement, like she was deciding whether to grab it or push it away. Denny sat beside her, bent forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing the bridge of his nose the way he did when life pressed harder than he could admit. When Emily finally found her voice, it came out thin and sharp. "You're doing this to punish me." "No," I said. "I'm doing this to protect myself." She let out a breath, not a calm one, but the kind someone exhales when refusing to cry. Then she laughed, a quick, brittle sound. "This is unbelievable. You're kicking us out of our own home." "Your home?" I asked softly. "Emily, you moved in 6 months ago." "That doesn't matter," she snapped. "We've built our life here." She said it like 6 months outweighed 40 years, like her routines, laminated charts, and labeled jars outweighed every plate I ever washed in this kitchen. Every night, I stayed awake listening for my son's footsteps returning safely home. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm giving you a choice. Respect the home, or find one that fits the life you want. Her jaw tightened. Respect? I'm the one who's been keeping this place functional. Denny made a soft noise, something like defeat. Emily, what? She hissed. You think she's right? I didn't say that. He rubbed his face again. I didn't know Mom felt this way. You didn't know anything, Emily shot back, because nobody tells me anything unless it's criticism. She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't right either. She lived in absolutes. I lived in rooms full of memories she hadn't bothered to learn. I leaned forward slightly. Emily, I'm not angry with you. I'm drawing a boundary you've refused to see. A boundary? She scoffed. You mean control? You want to control everything. I want control over the house I bought, the house I maintained, the house your husband grew up in. I let the words settle, not sharp, just true. That's not control. That's ownership. Her face flushed. And what about us? What if we want a home too? You should have one, I said, but not by erasing mine. For the first time since I'd known her, Emily's expression cracked. Not into anger, but into something softer, something almost human. Hurt pooled behind her eyes, and she looked away quickly, swallowing it before it could show. What exactly are you saying? Denny asked, finally lifting his head. That you two need to decide, I answered. Live here respectfully, or leave. And if we stay? Emily asked, voice ironed into flatness. Then you follow the rules of the home you're entering. I let a breath out. This kitchen is not yours to dictate. Neither is the laundry, or the furniture. I will not live in a house where I am treated like someone who wandered in by mistake. Emily blinked at me, stunned, maybe because she expected an explosion or tears or pleading. Young people often think older women don't know how to defend themselves quietly. Do you understand? I asked. She didn't answer, but her silence wasn't confusion. It was calculation. Denny spoke instead. Mom? Do you really want us to leave? I looked at him the way only a mother can look, soft, steady, loving, but unmovable. I want peace in my home. If you can't be part of that peace, then yes. I want you to go. He swallowed hard. Emily stood abruptly. Well, she said, her voice trembling despite her best effort. Then I guess we know where we stand. Emily, Denny began. No, she said, grabbing his arm. I won't be humiliated. I watched her pull at him, but he didn't move. Not yet. His eyes stayed on me, searching my face for something. Anger, fear, regret. But all he found was truth. Truth doesn't tremble. Truth simply is. And for the first time, he realized he couldn't negotiate it. Emily stood there rigid, her hand still wrapped around Denny's arm, but her grip loosened just slightly when she saw he wasn't following her lead. Her breath came quicker, sharper, and she blinked hard, as if trying to steady herself before the tears reached the corners of her eyes. She wasn't a woman who liked being witnessed in her vulnerability, especially not by me. This is unbelievable, she whispered, though her voice wasn't small. It was tight, stretched thin like fabric pulled too hard. All I ever did was try to help, try to make this place livable, and somehow I'm the villain? I folded my hands in my lap. Emily, You're not the villain, but you've been acting like the house is yours to reshape. And it isn't. That's ridiculous, she shot back. I was improving it. Cleaning it up. You should be grateful. Grateful. The words slid through the room like a draft. Denny's head lifted sharply. Emily, no, I mean it, she said, her voice rising. Your mom should be grateful I care enough to make this place work. Look at it. It's old. It needs structure. It needs order. It needs respect, I said quietly. She flinched. Actually flinched. Not from volume, but from something worse. Truth spoken without apology. You act like I've done something unforgivable, she said, pacing now, hands twisting in the air. So I moved some towels. So I reorganized a few drawers. That's not a crime. It's not, I agreed. But dismissing the woman who built this home is. She turned to Denny as if begging him to rescue her. Are you going to let her talk to me like that? He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked, the muscles clenching and releasing the way Roberts used to when he was thinking too hard. At last he whispered, you haven't exactly been gentle. Gentle? She repeated, voice cracking. I wasn't hired to be gentle. I came here to build a life. A life built on taking over mine, I said. She spun toward me. You don't get to say that. I just did. Her eyes shone then, not with fury, but with something like desperation. As if the foundation beneath her feet was dissolving and she didn't know how to stand without it. You blindsided us, she accused. Going behind our backs, changing legal documents. Who does that? A person who felt cornered, I replied. A person whose home was slipping away piece by piece. Denny finally stood, but he didn't stand beside her. He stood in the middle. Between us, yes, but not aligned with either side. His voice was quiet, heavy. Emily, Mom isn't wrong. You've been intense. Emily let out a stunned breath. You're taking her side. I'm trying to understand both, he said. But you haven't left much room for anyone else to breathe. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And, he added softer, this is her home. Emily pressed her fingertips to her temples. You're making me the enemy. I'm not the enemy. No one said you are, I answered. But your choices have consequences. She turned toward me sharply. So what now? You want us out? That's it? I want you to choose, I said. If you want to stay, you stay with respect. If that's not possible, leaving is the kinder option for all of us. Kinder? She echoed. You think this is kind? I think boundaries are, I said calmly. They prevent harm before harm grows roots. She shook her head, a small, frantic motion. No. This is insane. We can't just pack up our lives because you suddenly decided. I decided nothing suddenly, I interrupted gently. I've been shrinking in my own home for months. Today, I stopped shrinking. The room fell silent. Emily stared at me, then at Denny, then back at the envelope on the table. It was almost painful to watch her face shift through all the stages. Denial, anger, fear, hurt, one after another like turning pages too quickly. Finally, she whispered, I can't live like this. Not if everything I do is wrong. No one said that, I said, but you cannot erase me to feel comfortable. Her breath hitched. She looked at Denny again, pleading now. Tell her we can work this out. He didn't respond. Denny, she said, voice trembling. Tell her. He lowered himself back onto the couch slowly, hands clasped between his knees. I don't know what to say, he admitted. I think we need space. All of us. Emily froze. I nodded once. That's reasonable. She stared at him like she didn't recognize the man sitting in front of her. Then she whispered, barely audible, "You're choosing her." He shook his head sorrowfully. "I'm choosing peace." She let out a choked laugh. "Peace. Sure. Fine." Then she straightened, shoulders stiffening, eyes wiping clean like a window being cleared with one hard swipe. "Then I guess I know what I need to do." She looked at me, not with hatred, but with a cold kind of clarity. "I'll pack." And she walked out of the room, her steps clipped and sharp, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume behind. Denny didn't follow. He just sat there, staring at his hands, as the quiet of the house settled over us like dust. Emily didn't slam the bedroom door, but the click carried through the house like a crack in glass. A small sound, yes, but it held the weight of everything she hadn't said, everything she refused to hear. Denny and I sat in the living room a long moment, the space between us filled with something thick and heavy. Not anger, not even regret. Just the truth, settling where it belonged. He finally spoke. "I didn't want it to get this far." "I know," I said. "I should have said something earlier." "You should have," I agreed gently. There was no comfort in lying to him now. He leaned back, hands over his face for a moment, and when he dropped them, his eyes looked older. Not aged, but worn down, like a man who'd carried something too heavy for too long. "I'll help her pack," he murmured. "You don't have to." "She's my wife." I nodded. That part had never been in question. "Be kind," I said softly. He gave a sad, tired smile. "I always try." He stood, hesitated, then bent to kiss my forehead, something he hadn't done since he was a boy running out the door to catch the school bus. Then he walked down the hallway, shoulders slumped, a man torn between two loyalties he never learned how to balance. From the bedroom came muffled sounds, drawers pulled open, closet hangers scraping metal, the rustle of clothes being folded too quickly. Emily had never been gentle with her movements. Even packing now, she arranged her life with the same urgency she brought into my rooms. I didn't hover. I didn't listen at the door. Women my age know the dignity of staying where we belong. Instead, I stepped into the kitchen. The late afternoon sun stretched across the countertops, warming the tile, touching familiar corners with muted gold. The kettle sat where Emily had moved it the night before, high on a shelf no one uses, but I didn't reach for it. I just stood in the middle of the room, letting it breathe around me. For months, this had felt like a battleground. Now it felt like a room again. I ran my hand across the countertop, the way you run your fingers through the fur of an old, loyal dog, not claiming it, just acknowledging it, remembering what had been and what would not be taken from me again. After a while, I heard footsteps. Denny appeared in the doorway, holding a suitcase. Emily followed behind him, her jaw still tight, but her eyes red. She wouldn't look at me. Pride rarely survives eye contact. "We're going to stay with her sister for a bit," Denny said quietly. "Just until we figure things out." I nodded once. "Take your time." Emily inhaled sharply, as if expecting a speech, an accusation, some final punishment. But I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the only kindness we have left to offer. She murmured, barely audible, "Goodbye." Not, "Thank you." Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "Goodbye." That was enough. Denny paused, his hand lingering on the doorknob. "Mom, I'll call you tomorrow." "I know," I said. And I did. Because despite everything, he was still my boy. The door opened, cold air rushing in. Then it closed behind them with a soft thud. And suddenly, after months of tension, the house exhaled. The walls seemed to settle. The rooms softened. The air cleared, as though someone had opened every window without touching a latch. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock, the faint shifting of the housewood as it warmed itself in the sun. It wasn't triumph I felt, nor relief, nor loneliness. Just a calm, steady certainty. The kind a woman earns by surviving decades and refusing to be erased. This was my home, and I was finally standing in it again. The quiet after they left wasn't peaceful at first. It was too sharp, too sudden, like stepping out of a crowded room into cold night air. The house had grown used to their sounds, the hurried footsteps, the clatter of dishes. Emily's brisk voice dictating invisible rules. Now all that remained was stillness, layered so thick I could almost hear the dust settling on the frames of old family photos. I stood in the living room for a long time, listening. Not for them to return, just to feel the house breathe again. People think old homes creak because the wood is failing, but that's not true. Homes creak when they exhale, when the tension that's been holding them tight finally eases. And that night, the house creaked like a body stretching after being held too long in an uncomfortable position. I walked through each room slowly, not inspecting, not reclaiming, just moving the way you do when revisiting something precious. The air felt different, warmer, open, as if the rooms were finally allowed to remember themselves. In the living room, the chair I always sat in was still turned slightly toward the window, where the evening light was thinning into blue. Emily had always insisted it should face the television instead. "The room looks unbalanced," she'd say. I'd stopped moving it back after a while. "You learn to choose your battles carefully at my age." But now I reached out and gently angled it back toward the window, the way Robert liked it, the way I liked it, the way it had been before anyone tried to modernize the life out of this house. In the kitchen, the towel she'd scolded me about still hung stiff and useless on its hook. I took it down, folded it, put it in a drawer where decorative things belong, and replaced it with the soft, worn towel Robert used for years. The moment I draped it over the hook, the kitchen seemed to warm by a few degrees. Some objects carry memory the way skin carries warmth. I opened a few drawers, not out of suspicion, but habit, and found everything exactly where she'd left it. Spoons crammed tightly into their narrow drawer. Spices alphabetized like soldiers in formation. My grandmother's old cast-iron pan shoved behind her newer ones, the ones that promised non-stick perfection, but never tasted right. I didn't undo any of it, not yet. Order didn't need to be restored in a single evening. Tonight wasn't about rearranging things. It was about feeling space return. I made myself a cup of tea. Just tea. No tension. No eyes over my shoulder. No lecture about the kettle placement. I drank it standing by the window, listening to the soft hum of the world outside. A memory surfaced, unbidden, gentle. Robert standing beside me on a night just like this one, his hand warm on my back, saying, "A house doesn't feel like home until you've taken a moment to stand in it alone." At the time, I thought he meant moving in. Now I knew he also meant moving through change. I stepped onto the back porch. The air was cool but not cold, and the sky had that deep navy color that looks almost velvet. I held the railing, feeling the worn wood under my palm, the grooves carved by years of weather, and the weight of hands older and stronger than mine once were. Across the yard, the wind rustled the leaves of the maple tree. It had survived storms that uprooted younger ones. It was twisted now, leaning slightly, shaped by seasons not always kind. But it stood. It always stood. A car passed on the street. Not theirs. They were long gone now. Emily's rigid posture, Denny's conflicted frown fading into someone else's evening. There was no satisfaction in thinking about it. Only distance. Only the quiet truth that some departures are necessary, even when they sting. When I went back inside, I turned off the lights one by one. Not because I was going to bed, but because the house looked better in low light that night. Soft, honest, unguarded. In the hallway, I paused by a photo hanging crooked on the wall. Denny at 5, holding a paper crown he'd made at school. Robert, kneeling beside him, steadying the crown on his head with a gentle hand. Both of them laughing. I touched the edge of the frame, letting my fingers rest there. People often talk about empty nests as if the silence is a wound. But sometimes, silence is the only way a home remembers itself. I returned to my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the quiet settle around me fully, finally, without fight or fear. This wasn't victory. It wasn't loss. It was something older, deeper. A woman standing in the middle of her own life again. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. The next morning I woke before the sun, as I always do, but the air in the room felt different, lighter, almost curious. Dawn had barely begun to stretch across the sky when I sat up, listening to the quiet house. There were no murmured arguments behind closed doors, no hurried footsteps, no clatter of drawers being opened for reasons I didn't understand. Just breath. Just stillness. It's remarkable how silence can feel warm when it finally belongs to you again. I made my way to the kitchen wearing my old robe, the one Robert used to tease me about. The floorboards creaked in the familiar way, greeting me instead of warning me I was being too loud. I touched the doorway with my fingertips, a small habit, a small prayer, and stepped inside. The kitchen felt like it was exhaling. A few of Emily's polished jars still stood on the counter, labels facing outward with military precision. The laminated laundry chart hung on the fridge, too bright for the room. Her order was still here, but without her presence pressing on it, the sharp edges dulled. A home always chooses its heartbeat, and this one no longer echoed with her rhythm. I didn't start rearranging, not yet. Restoring your life is a careful thing, not something to rush. Instead, I boiled water for tea. The kettle whistled the way it always did, its voice thin but determined. For the first time in months, I didn't brace myself for comment or correction. I simply let the sound fill the room. I carried my mug to the small table by the window and sat where the morning sun would eventually land. Outside, the yard was wrapped in a pale haze, that soft early light that makes everything look kinder. A squirrel picked its way along the fence. A neighbor's dog barked once, half-heartedly, then quieted again. The world was going on, as it always had, but I was different. I took a slow sip of tea and let myself feel the truth of the last day. Not the drama of it, not the confrontation or the words exchanged, but the deeper shift beneath it all. I had stepped back into my own life, fully, without apology. Old women aren't supposed to make bold moves. We're meant to adapt, to adjust, to shrink. At least that's what the world gently, or not so gently, expects. But there comes a point where shrinking starts to feel like disappearing. And disappearing is something I promised Robert I would never do. Around noon, I stepped outside to check the mailbox. The wind was crisp, carrying the scent of winter coming early. A few leaves skittered across the driveway, making that dry whisper sound that always reminds me of school days and packed lunches and little boys running to catch the bus. The street was empty, peacefully so. On my way back inside, I paused and looked at the house. My house. I saw the porch sagging a little more than last year, the shutters Robert hung slightly askew, the gutters needing to be cleared. To Emily, these had been flaws. To me, they were signs of a life lived fully, a home that had tried its best to hold everyone who passed through it. Inside, I took down the laminated laundry chart. I folded it once, then again, and tucked it into the drawer where we used to keep menus and coupons. It made no sound when it landed, just a quiet surrender. I wandered the rooms slowly, placing small things back where they belonged. A photo frame shifted an inch to the left, a vase turned toward the light, the spoon drawer returned to its rightful place. Nothing drastic, nothing vengeful, just returning the house to itself. By the time the sun began to set, the rooms felt warmer. Not because of the thermostat, but because a home remembers the hands that built it. It responds. That evening, I sat in the living room with the lamp on low. The sky was already turning navy, and the house hummed with that soft nighttime voice old homes have. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel lonely. I felt aligned, as though all the quiet parts of me had finally stepped back into the same place. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something steadier. A woman reclaimed her space, and the world didn't fall apart. It simply adjusted, as it always does. I cooked dinner that evening the way I used to, slowly, without rushing, without anyone hovering behind me explaining how the counters should look or how the knife should be held. Just the steady rhythm of my own hands doing what they'd done for decades. The house felt warm again, not loud, not lively, just warm, like an old sweater pulled from the back of a drawer and slipped on after too many cold months. I chopped vegetables the way Robert liked them, uneven and honest. I let the soup simmer until the scent filled the whole kitchen, reaching into corners that had forgotten the smell of something made with care rather than efficiency. When it was ready, I set one bowl on the table. Just one. That used to sadden me after he died. Tonight it didn't. Tonight, the bowl was a quiet reminder that presence is not measured in numbers. I sat down, spoon in hand, and looked around the room. The towel on the hook was the soft, worn one again. The jars Emily arranged so carefully were still lined up, but now they looked harmless, like guests left behind after a party who would eventually find their way out. The house no longer braced itself. Neither did I. I took a bite of soup and let it settle. Simple, plain, familiar. It tasted like belonging. After dinner, I washed the dishes, letting the warm water soothe my hands. Outside, the night had deepened into velvet, and the porch light glowed gently against the dark. I moved slowly through each room afterward, switching off lamps, closing curtains, touching the edges of furniture like greeting old friends I'd been away from too long. When I reached my bedroom, I paused at the doorway. The quiet in the room wasn't empty. It was full of everything I had reclaimed, my dignity, my steadiness, my place. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself breathe. Not the careful breath of someone trying not to disturb the air, but a full one. a claiming one. The kind women forget they are allowed to take when life has tried to press them into corners. For a moment, I imagined Robert sitting beside me, his big hands folded loosely, his eyes calm, in that way only men who've lived enough years to stop shouting can be. I imagined him nodding, proud without saying a word. And then the thought drifted away, leaving behind only warmth. I lay down, pulled the blanket over myself, and felt the house settle around me in quiet agreement. Nothing grand had happened here today. No shouting victory. No dramatic triumph. Just a woman refusing to disappear. And winning. Before I turned off the lamp, I thought about all the women who make themselves small so others can feel big. All the women who step aside because it's easier than stepping forward. All the women who forget that age does not take away their right to stand in their own home, in their own life, with their own voice. To them, to you, I say this softly but clearly. Don't shrink. Don't apologize for existing, and don't let anyone convince you that you are less than the space you've built. Protect what's yours. Even if your voice shakes. If this story touched something in you, stay with me. There are more truths to tell,